Daf Yomi, tractate of Metzia, page 57b, top of the page with the words Da Filu Pachos Michdei Ona Choser. That even if the difference in price is less than the measure of exploitation, the exploited party may renege on the transaction. Rabbi Yochanan does not accept the opinion of Rav Chizda, and Reish Lakish does. Reish Lakish. Meisvei. The Gemara raises an objection to Chizda's opinion from a Braita. Dealings with a layman are subject to the halachot of interest and exploitation, but dealings with consecrated property are not subject to the halachot of interest and exploitation. The Gemara answers, is the objection from the Braita stronger than that from the Mishnah, which was diffused when we established it to be referring to the principle of exploitation, meaning that the principle that up to 1/6 is not considered exploitation does not apply to the consecrated property? So too, the Braita should be understood. The halachot of interest and the principle of exploitation apply to dealings with a layman, but the halachot of interest and the principle of exploitation does not apply to dealings involving consecrated property. The Gemara raises a difficulty. If so, is that consistent with that which is taught in the latter clause that a Braita, this is the stringency with regard to the layman, in contrast to the halacha with regard to consecrated property? According to this explanation, the halacha with regard to consecrated property is more stringent than the halacha with regard to a layman. The Gemara answers, this stringency is only in the case of interest, as it is permitted to collect interest from consecrated property. The Gemara asks, if so, let the Tana also teach, this is the stringency with regard to consecrated property, in contrast to the halacha with regard to the layman in the case of exploitation. The Gemara rejects this. Hachi hashta bishlam zechomer behedyot mi behegdish v'sulo ela hegdish zechomer v'sulo. The Gemara rejects this question. How can these be compared? Granted, the Mishnah states this is the stringency with regard to the layman, in contrast to the halacha with regard to consecrated property, and nothing further. In other words, there is no other cases where the halacha is more stringent for the layman than it is for consecrated property. But with regard to consecrated property, can one say this is the stringency and nothing further? There are no other stringencies. There are many halachot in which consecrated property is treated more stringently than non-sacred property. Ribis de hagdish hechidami. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of interest in cases of consecrated property? If we say that the temple treasurer lent 100 consecrated dinars in exchange for repayment of 120 dinars, 100 in exchange of 120, didn't the treasurer thereby misuse consecrated property? And once the treasurer misused the money by giving it to a layman, his money immediately leaves its consecrated state and assumes non-sacred status. And it is then money of a layman, and the halachot of interest apply to it. Amrav Hoshaya, Hachavamayaskinan. Rabbi Yehoshua said, with what are we dealing here? We are dealing with a case where one accepts upon himself to supply fine flour to the temple at the price of flour of a price of 4 se'ah for a selah, and the market price rose and stood at 3 se'ah for a selah, as it is taught in a Braita. In the case of one who accepts upon himself to supply fine flour at 4 se'ah for a selah, and their market price stood at 3 se'ah for a selah, he is required to fulfill his commitment and supply fine flour at 4 se'ah for a selah. if one committed to supply fine flour at 3 se'ah for a selah, and their market price decreased until it stood at 4 se'ah for a selah, he must supply fine flour at 4 se'ah for a selah. This is a form of interest, as the result is that the temple treasury is at an advantage, although an arrangement of that kind is prohibited in transactions involving laymen. In dealings of the temple treasury, it is permitted. Rav Papa Amar, Rav Papa said that there is a less complicated case of interest involving consecrated property. Here we are dealing with building stones that are entrusted to the temple treasurer in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. As Shmuel says, one builds the structures in the temple with non-sacred materials to avoid misuse of consecrated property during construction, and one consecrates those materials thereafter. The treasurer has provisional possession of property that will ultimately belong to the temple treasury. The stones are non-sacred and can be loaned to others, but nevertheless, they are not subject to the halachot of interest. The Mishnah teaches slaves, documents, land, and consecrated property are not subject to the halachot of payment of double the principal. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? It is, as the sages taught in a Braita with regard to the verse that discusses double payment, for any matter of trespass, whether it be for an ox or for a donkey, for a sheep, for a garment, or for any manner of lost thing, about which one shall say, this is it, that claims of both of them shall come before the judges, the one of whom the judges shall convict, shall pay double to the other. Exodus 22:8. For any matter of trespass is a generalization, whether it be for an ox, for a donkey, for a sheep, for a garment, is a detail. And when the verse states, or for any manner of lost thing, it then generalizes again. Consequently, this verse contains a generalization and a detail and a generalization. A klal, product klal. And one of the 13 rules of exegesis states that in such a case you may deduce that the verse is referring only to items similar to the detail. Therefore, just as each of the items mentioned in the detail is clearly defined as an item that is movable property and has intrinsic monetary value, so too double payment is practiced with regard to any item that is movable property and has intrinsic monetary value. Land is excluded as it is not movable property. Canaanite slaves are excluded as they are compared to land in many areas of halakha. Financial documents are excluded as although they are movable property, they do not have intrinsic monetary value. The value of the material on which the document is written is negligible. Documents are valuable only because they serve as proof for monetary claims. Finally, consecrated property is excluded because it is written in the verse that the one found liable shall pay double to the other, meaning to another person, but not to the temple treasury. The Mishnah teaches nor payment or 4 and 5 times the principal, as these payments do not apply to consecrated animals. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for this exclusion? The Gemara explains, the Merciful One states, a payment of 4 or 5 times the principal, but not payment of 3 or 4 times the principal. It has already been established that there is no double payment in the cases of the Mishnah. The 4-fold or 5-fold payment in the case of slaughter or sale of a stolen sheep or cow comprises the principal, the double payment, and then an additional or 2 or 3 times the principal respectively. Consequently, once the double payment is subtracted, the total paid would be 3 or 4 times the principal, and the verse makes no allowance for such a payment. The Mishnah teaches an unpaid bailee does not take an oath if these items were stolen or lost. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? It is as the sages taught in Braita with regard to the verse that discusses an unpaid bailee. When a man delivers to his neighbor money or vessels to safeguard, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall approach the judge. Exodus 22, 6-7. When a man delivers to his neighbor is a generalization. Money or vessels is a detail. And when the verse states, and it is stolen out of the man's house, then it generalizes again. Consequently, this verse contains a generalization and a detail and a generalization, and one of the 13 rules of exegesis states that in such a case you may deduce that the verse is referring only to items similar to the detail. Therefore, just as each of the items mentioned in the detail is clearly defined as an item that is movable property and has intrinsic monetary value, so too double payment is practiced with regard to any item that is movable property and has intrinsic monetary value. Land is excluded as it is not movable property. Canaanite slaves are excluded as they are compared to land in many areas of halakha. Financial documents are excluded as although they are movable property, they do not have intrinsic monetary value. The value of the material on which the document is written is negligible. Documents are valuable only because they serve as proof for monetary claims. Finally, consecrated property is excluded because it is written in the verse that the one is found liable shall pay double to the other, meaning to another person, but not to the temple treasury. The Mishnah continues, a paid bailee does not pay if these items were stolen or lost. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? The Gemara answers, it is as the sages taught in a Braita with regard to the verse that discusses a paid bailee. When a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to a safeguard, and it dies or it is hurt or is driven away, no man seeing it, the oath of the Lord, I am comfortable taking an oath. Rabbi Wolf said that. I'm comfortable taking an oath to say the Rebbe is right. Shall be between them both. But if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. Exodus 22, 9-10. When a man delivers to his neighbor, it is a generalization. A donkey or an ox or a sheep is a detail. And when the verse states, or any beast to safeguard, then it generalizes again. Consequently, this verse contains a generalization, a detail, and a generalization. And one of the 13 rules of exegesis states that in such a case, you may deduce that the verse is referring only to items similar to the detail. Therefore, just as each of the items mentioned in the detail is clearly defined as an item that is movable property and has intrinsic monetary value, so too double payment is practiced with regard to any item that is movable property and has intrinsic monetary value. That's what it is, man. That's all it is. Yatsu karkois sheina metaltalin yatsu avodim shehuksh lekarkois. That's the Litvish way. Land is excluded as it is not movable property. Canaanite slaves are excluded as they are compared to land in many areas of halakha. Financial documents are excluded as although they are movable property, they do not have intrinsic monetary value. The value of the material on which the document is written is negligible. Documents are of value only because they serve as proof for monetary claims. Finally, consecrated property is excluded because it is written in the verse that the one found liable to pay double to the other. In other words, to another person. Rabbis. Paul Mickelson. To another person, but not to the temple treasury. Ilahu Paul Mickelson. Shomer Chinam. Eino Nishbar. After determining the source of the halachot in the Mishnah, the Gemara analyzes these halachot. The Mishnah teaches an unpaid bailee does not take an oath if these items were stolen or lost. And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Mishnah. Half shekels were donated by the people during the month of Adar and placed in a special chamber in the temple from from where, as needed, some of the shekels were taken for use in purchasing public offerings in the coming months. This was done in order to give all of the Jewish people a share in those public offerings. Additionally, from the moment that the money is taken from there, both those shekels that arrived at the temple and those that did not yet arrive became temple property. The Mishnah teaches Shkalim 5a with regard to residents of the city who sent their shekels to the temple and the coins were stolen from the agent or were lost en route. The halakha depends on the circumstances. If this occurred after the contributions of the chamber had already been collected from the chamber,